As you can tell from the title, as your career bestie, we're about to have a tough conversation because this is something that I have noticed with toxic job escapees and toxic job survivors who are really struggling to get over their toxic job. They try all of the things. They watch all of the videos. They go to all of the therapy. They're seeing all of these coaches, and they're just really struggling to get past their toxic job. And one commonality I have seen has been how they refer to themselves to. And it's indicative of a mindset that I really want to make sure that you avoid or that you choose to drop today. So we are going to be talking about a victim mindset. I had a whole script ready because this is a sensitive topic and I want to make sure that I'm being careful about what I'm saying. But honestly, I recorded it and it just didn't feel like my vibe. I didn't feel like it was the right conversation and the right flow. So I'm just turning on my camera. I'm going to do minimal editing on this one, and let's just be real. So first of all, we need to differentiate being a victim from being victimized. Anyone can be victimized. Like, you can control if a toxic boss is psychologically abusive towards you. Like, I know that's like kind of intense to start this video off, but it's true. Like, you don't control the behavior of toxic people at work. You don't control the behavior of, the people that are delightful to work with either. They choose how they conduct themselves, right? Now, when we see that they act how they act and that it has nothing to do with us, even though it's happening to us. And of course, this isn't to like discount the harm, the trauma that does occur in a toxic work environment. That is very real. It requires healing. It is like negative vibes are real. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But when it's aimed at us, and we start to adopt the victim mindset and identify as a victim, this has a very different connotation because now being a victim is our identity. And when we think about what a victim is, well, a victim is powerless. A victim has no control. A victim doesn't have any power. Things are just happening to a victim and they're in this disadvantaged state, but also in this traumatized state. And so when we call ourselves victims, I really think that we are, to a certain degree, undermining our power and our potential, if that makes sense. And again, I'm not saying any of this to judge you if you have identified as a victim at any point in time. The reason why I'm making this today is because I don't want you to continue to do so from your toxic work environment indefinitely. So I want to start with the concept of not being in control and that things are just happening. And this is, I know, very common in a toxic work environment, and it is part of the manipulation that happens in a toxic work environment. And that's why we feel really stuck and why we stay even when we know we should leave and all of those things. But the thing is that when we objectively step back and look at it, and this is much easier to do when you're not in it anymore, I promise you that. But when we step back, we see that there's a lot of things that we do have control over, and we have control over who we choose to work with and where we choose to work. Like, you can find another job and leave that toxic job. I know that feels hard. It doesn't always feel possible, but it is something that you can do. Some people are in the financial position to just go in and quit that job or to change teams. Like, there's all of these options that are available. And I know that the world starts to feel very limited when we're going through this, and that is actually a trauma response of not feeling options, and it's because we're just in this constant survival mode. But we actually do have a lot of control. We have control over our boundaries, our physical boundaries, our emotional boundaries, our psychological boundaries, our energetic boundaries. Like, I'm just not available to receive that energy. And I know that that's a hard place to be in. And I'm going to be creating more content on that in a few weeks. So make sure you're subscribed if you want to hang out for that one, because I think it's really important. But there's so much control that we do have and so much that we can do even when it didn't feel like it. And part of it is that when we survive the toxic job, we kind of form these stories and these beliefs that we didn't have any control and that we didn't have any say. But what if you were to go back from a more empowered place and analyze and think about the things that you actually objectively could control? Would they be easy? Not necessarily. Would it be hard? Maybe. But there was all of these choices and decisions that were still available for you to make because you're still a human with free will, right? And then the other thing is that, feeling disempowered, and this is something that I think is so common. I mean, it is when we look at the dynamics in a toxic work environment, all of the kind of the toxic behaviors and and things that happen is to make you feel like you don't have any power, like you are not awesome, like you are not worthy of confidence, that you can't trust yourself and all of these things. And again, we can objectively step back, especially again, much easier when we're not in the situation, but we can step back and we can start asking ourselves, like, is that true? Because I think that each of you has an enormous amount of power. You have an enormous amount of potential, and that the dynamics of the toxic work environment have kind of clouded the ability for you to see that. And the more that you can reinstate and realize your power and stand in your power and own your power, that the more kind of liberated you are from the toxic work environment, and like you can't feel like a victim when you feel powerful and when you feel like you're in control and that you have the say in your life and your career and that you are in control of your career and of your life. Let me know if that makes sense. So that was something that I really wanted to talk to you about today. The other thing is kind of going into that, like the world is just happening to me. And the thing is that when we look into the dynamics of a toxic work environment, is that they're both triggering and instilling beliefs about ourselves. We've talked about this multiple times in videos that I've made about recovering from a toxic work environment and things like that. But when we're in a toxic work environment, we are adapting behaviorally in order to make ourselves less visible, to make ourselves less seen, to make ourselves less targeted. We're developing coping mechanisms as well to minimize kind of the harm and the trauma that are occurring to us from a toxic boss or toxic coworkers, whatever. But then what happens is that when we leave that environment, those behaviors are going with us. I also put an article up on LinkedIn last week where I talked about what happens with trauma in the brain and workplace and the trauma. Like workplace trauma is trauma. And trauma actually changes your brain. We've talked about it here too. When you're in this confrontational, conflict-driven, toxic work environment, your amygdala is constantly being activated. That is your fight, flight, or freeze mode. So when that is active, the rational center of your brain actually shuts down. We can't think from our logical prefrontal cortex. So it impacts these two areas of our brain. It also impacts our hippocampus, which is impacting things like long-term memory. So there are actual brain changes that can occur. Now, I'm a big believer in neuroplasticity, that these changes can be undone, that recovery is available, and I do believe that the science backs it up, and also just my hippie beliefs and vibes do back this up. And then I touched on this last week too, and I want to talk to it more generally, and that is the negativity that happens in a toxic work environment. And obviously, if you're still in a toxic work environment, you are probably feeling it, but when you leave the toxic work environment, you imagine that that's just gonna go away, oh yeah, good thing that's behind me and I'm not in those toxic vibes anymore. But the thing is that toxic energy does have the ability to kind of stay with you, and so you feel kind of low and you feel drained and you feel unconfident and all of these things. And that's something that we need to intentionally undo. So the tips that I gave you in last week's video, even if you've left a toxic work environment, are going to be really effective in terms of elevating your vibe. However, I'm a big believer in that we need to go through and we need to actually process. We need to unpack our toxic job if we want to get over our toxic job. Now, I'm really, I feel really lucky and fortunate that I've gotten hundreds, if not thousands, of messages from Career Besties who hang here, and that you've watched my videos and you've been able to do this and you've been able to get over your toxic job and have this fantastic career and this fantastic life. And that's literally why I'm here doing what I do for free on my channel, and then obviously in my paid workshops and programs as well. But we need to actually get through the process of clearing that. And I know some people can do it on their own. They message me, but that when I say that, that can also be very triggering, because if you haven't done that, then it's okay, why am I so broken that I can't do this on my own? Well, do take into consideration that we have sometimes differences in support system. There's a very different experience that you have when you have, a partner or friends who totally understand your toxic work environment, or are just willing to listen and to understand what you're going through, and help you process that. Therapists can be very, very helpful with this because they're looking towards the past, but then we also need to look towards the future and to understand what we want our careers to look like, because that can feel very limited in a toxic work environment, right? And when we feel all jobs are going to be toxic and that we spot this toxicity everywhere. Part of that is part of the toxic job hangover, but it's also because we haven't done the work to heal ourselves from the toxic work experience that we had. So this is why, I'm unapologetically talking to you guys about my new workshop, WTF Just Happened, to help you unpack your toxic job and break the toxic job cycle. Because I know that some of you guys, want to just tap into my energy live because it's a treat, of course, but also to have a guided process of what questions can I ask myself? What do I need to understand, and how can I shift how I perceive this? Again, not gaslighting yourself, but it's just actually understanding deeply what happened and then seeing the truth in that and kind of dropping the trauma response from what actually happened in your head and what this meant, right? Because it feels big when we're in it, and that kind of carries through. So we need to do that healing as well. And so I wanted to talk to you. What else did I want to say? I wanted to say something else. Okay, yeah, that was the other thing. So the last thing that I wanted to talk to you guys, now that I've shamelessly plugged that workshop, and I hope to see some of you guys in there live, is that another thing that I see that I feel like sometimes we hold on to this identity is that we feel like victims until the bad actors take accountability. Until your toxic boss acknowledges their bad behavior, or your toxic coworkers take accountability, that then you're kind of in the state of not being able to get over it. But I want you guys to step back and think about this. I'm going to give you a prompt. So I want you to think about a time that someone in your life that you were close to did you harm. It could be a significant other, it could be an ex because they did lots of things, it could be a friend or a family member. And now I want you to think about, a time where someone caused you harm, but also they did take accountability and they apologized. Now, when that person apologized for that bad action that caused you harm, did you magically feel better and were totally over it? Or did it hurt a little bit less now that it was acknowledged, but then you still needed to do the work inside yourself to get over it? Because I can almost guarantee that it took you time inside of yourself in order to get over that thing that happened and to actually let it go. So that's what we need to think about with our toxic job, because the chances are is that your toxic boss, your toxic coworkers, your toxic company, they're not going to take accountability for what they are and for what they did. And even if they did, their shame is going to be so big that they're really unlikely to ever issue this apology to you. And even if you get it, it's not going to be the thing that makes you heal. Them being accountable and seeing their actions is actually completely disconnected from your recovery from a toxic job. So I think that that's another really important thing for us to know. And ultimately, where I want to leave you guys, because again, I talked about this in my last video, I want to make sure that my channel is a place that is uplifting even when we have hard conversations like this. And it's because I really believe in you. I'm not just saying career bestie. I really feel through this screen, I am your career bestie. And I, with every fiber of my being, believe in your power, in your potential, and that you don't just deserve to have a really good career and a really good life. I feel like you're entitled to have a really good career and a really good life, and that what we need to do is to do the work in order to construct that reality. When you've been in a toxic job, there's a little bit more clearing that we need to do to make space for it. However, those things are available, and what I hope I can help you with and everything that I do is to create that for yourself. So I'm sure I have another helpful video to help you get over your toxic job. I'm going to put it here. If you want to check out that workshop, it is on the 10th, so go and get in there because it is a live workshop. And if this video helped you, give it a thumbs up. As always, my friend, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.